It appears that, for your mind to settle into sleep, we must allow the river of time to become a deep, wide and unhurried ocean, taking your thoughts all the way to the shores of slumber. Looking for a tale that is not simply repeated but filled with deeper and richer examples of those unique truths, traces of history and uncommon stories that can be found by closely exploring the essence of the Middle Ages. Therefore, we will try to enjoy each one of these moments, stretching them out and making our first journey seem nothing compared to what is to come. Even now, as a quiet question, it still guides us, as if from a distant and dimming lantern in the vast darkness of the past. If you, a person in our modern era, got lost in that ancient time, how would everything around you, the beliefs, the day-to-day actions, and the mood of the time influence you? At what point did the design of your 21st century soul grow weary, sail into strange lands, and abruptly, undeniably change? Allow your body to relax more deeply and breathe softly to release all your worries from the day. We are not trying to get to our destination as fast as possible. The Middle Ages extended for more than 1,000 years, so there is plenty of time tonight to visit a little bit in our imagination. Day 1. The concert, a new sensitivity is created, a powerful experience. When you first switched, it would feel more than a shock. It would be a storm of sensations, a full reset of your mind and body, so powerful it would feel like being rebuilt by the air all around you and exposed to reality how it truly is. Perhaps we ought to concentrate even more enthusiastically on the smells, since they would be the first and most determined messengers from this prior new world. A smell you may not be used to in today's world. Try to be aware of the particular quality that wood smoke releases into the air. Did you notice the strong pine smell from the forest as its smoke passed through your nose and hurt your throat? What about those times when oxygen was blocked and the smoky fumes overwhelmed the only space, making your eyes hurt and bore tears from you all the time? Maybe peat was the fuel which took a lot of effort to chop from the nearby bog, leaving a smoke that smelled uniquely earthy and oily, making everything in the place smell that way, including your clothes and skin. This smoke wasn't just from the fire, but it also protected their dwelling, keeping certain bugs away, which I am sure they were happy to believe, as it left a fine dusty layer of soot everywhere and covered their roof with black ash. The next wild smell to greet me is the powerful combination of many biological odors in the air. Pigs, appearing in most peasant homes as a regular sight, might have seemed only likely to become bacon, a much-desired treat for the family, but in fact they kept everyone warm, digesting or burning anything that was thrown to them. Its fragrance would reflect the commingling of mild, fruity breath with the strong aroma of the soil and straw it roamed daily, and of its urine, which turned sharp and smellier when the straw was not carefully exchanged frequently, as well as its large, lingering, foul-smelling feces that were sometimes moved with a miserable, limited shovel. If the chickens spent the cold or dangerous nights inside, the dry smell of their feathers and their faint, strong-smelling droppings would mix with the air. Should there be a nursing infant in the hut, her mother most likely carried the distinctive scent of her breast milk, which accompanied the familiar aroma of unwashed people, their coiled hair, sweat, dust, and the simple, non-varied food they are likely to have every day. If a man has a dried blood cut on his chin, the scent can be faint and metallic, but a similar smell from a child's knee could point to a bacterial infection, since, in this period, antibiotics were not yet discovered. If we step out, let's not rush by the street without seeing its vivid and outlandish look. How can we not mention the mud? But what is its quality? Was it pulling at the wooden shoes of your neighbors, or the same substance all over your own hardened, calloused and sensitive feet that made walking a real struggle each time you left the house? Or the dry mud of hot days which would cause clouds of dusty air to rise every time an ox cart or the wind moved, all over your face, what you were wearing, and anything you tried to eat outside? Also found in this soil are the bits of rubbish left by what people throw away each day. Not all waste is generic, but here we find proper bits of medieval history. A broken shard of pottery, a weathered but still rough piece torn by a dropped bowl, a dull, broken strap from a used shoe or harness, a fish head, once full of eyes that are now hollow and gazing up, and a pile of cabbage and turnip tops, stinking of sulfur and fast becoming moldy. The main gutter in the center of the street, if you looked, would show you signs of rats such as a sickly and sparkling grease and what was left of their furry carcasses, teeming with buzzing flies in summer. Just try to imagine how thick these flies can get, covering anything organic, open wounds and left-out food with their endless crawling. As well as the larger ones, stubborn rats can be seen sidling the buildings and their shining eyes peeking out from the lightless spots. And the sounds? Let them cover you like a blanket, adding one layer on top of another without auto-correcting. Listen a little more and you might notice that blacksmith's apprentice got the job done by using muscles you could measure. Listen to the screeching squeal of the grindstone when an axe or a scythe blade was sharpened, producing a burst of bright sparks that quickly vanished. Listening to the sound of the adze, a plane and a wooden mallet used by the village carpenter to form timber and planks. Weaving yarn on a spindle whorl or shuttle loom in the village was quiet compared to what men did. But it went on all the time, often while women walked or talked with neighbors. And you can hear sheep bleating, while cattle are being taken out to graze. There was always crowing too, and donkey braying would occasionally shock you. The cries, sudden bursts of laughter, squabbles and rough play that children engage in. Not the planned shouting led by a teacher standing on a playground. Maybe they were busy with Hoodman Blind, the version of Blind Man's Bluff where one stands with their back to the speaker, uses the words hoodle, who to fool others, and if caught they become the seeker for the next round. Or playing with knuckle bones, those bones from the sheep's ankles that were constantly handled and thus polished, or they were romping around, laughing loudly through the narrow and muddy streets, amazed by their own swift and sturdy feet. As they played out their adventures, they experienced more freedom and far more dangers, from falls to water or lightning-fast hoof strikes and illnesses. At no time of day or night did the medieval village completely become silent. Wind, blowing all the time without being seen, gently whispered and moaned in your roof, making the thatch creak sometimes like indistinct voices, other times like sighs, and contributed to your fears. The rain would make a constant, dull beat on the roof, causing you to wait nervously for the first drop that would mean a water leak that should be patched right away with moss, clay, or anything damp. Dogs, working animals, or obedient scavengers would bark at every small movement. Think a moonlit night was a cause for howling, and be frightened by the full-on howling of wide forest wolves that could threaten the village from time to time. At that time, forests were wild, natural, mysterious, and some people believed them to contain important things and dangerous dangers, including bears, wolves, bandits, sprites, demons, and beasts with magical powers. Changes in light quality during the day would precisely and completely alter your feelings and how you see the world. Before sunrise, the hut was so dark that moving was slow, as you might bump into someone or something. As the cold, dim light came through the one small window, the objects became visible, but their colors and feel were dim and unclear, leaving everything to be seen only in shades of gray. Sometimes, at midday, dusty rays of sunlight pushed through the hole in the wall and the ever-present hole in the roof, turning a small area on the floor bright for a short time and making the mud, animal fur, and skin particles nearby dance in the air. As soon as dusk fell, the space would swiftly grow shadowy, the outside world darkening to gray and then black, with only the center fire casting fitful rays inward, making people's faces look funny. Shadows bend and twist, and much of the room remain gloomy. Since you now enjoy bright light everywhere and do not need to see well at night, you would have to get used to darkness and learning to see and move with only very little light. A shadow that can't be explained could be scary, as could any unusual sound from the house. The first time people needed to find any kind of safe or safer water. If a village well was not built with safety in mind and was free to catch passing damage from surface water, many diseases could easily reach it. Seeing a layer of greasy scum on top of the water or a faint smell of something organic may indicate pollution. As the stream's clear and attractive sound echoed, it could be hiding poisonous waste from places upstream, such as a village, a tannery, or where animals with diseases were washed or slaughtered. Those living in the time may have developed some strengths against diseases because they were exposed to them consistently, or they may have considered these severe stomach problems to be a part of normal, everyday living. Every time you drink unboiled milk, it would put your digestive system at high risk. The only thing you could do to protect yourself is to boil the water, but it might be hard knowing how to achieve that. Since fires were still necessary in those days, you would need to find a pot, either a family-owned pottery or iron cauldron, plus firewood for cooking. Not all wood was easy to find. People could usually pick up fallen branches, but a lord's permission was necessary to chop down living trees, and not following the rule might lead to fines, whipping, or other cruel punishments. Each effort you make to survive would be accompanied by small difficulties you've never faced before, and they could still harm you. The amazing thing about Thailand is its food. The first plate of bread and very watered-down pottage. Considering bread more carefully, we see that it was the fundamental food. People would often make it from wheat and rye, but for the less wealthy, a baker might use barley and rye or mix some oats and pea flour into their dough. The fact that wheat made the bread whiter and lighter made it valuable enough that even the lord liked it, and so it was primarily sold or hoarded by him. The grain would be roughly ground at the lord's mill, where the greedy and mistrusted miller might take out of the bag much more than his share. Since whole grain meant keeping the bran and germ, it would be nutritious and very dense, but to today's taste, extremely challenging to eat. Sometimes sourdough bread gets its sour taste from a saved piece of dough used in older versions, passed down by family over the years. If their lord owned the village oven, bread could be baked in it for a fee, though usually individuals cooked it on the hearth at home, turning it over and over like a pancake. Every bite was savored. No piece went to waste, as each was valued. The pottage, which was always there on the stovetop, forms the foundation of food life for the poor. Try to imagine its scent as it slowly simmered or just barely bubbled all day over the smoky and unreliable cooking fire. It would be earthy and vegetal, but a little bit of meat, usually pork, might add its own smoky or salty aroma if it was lucky significant day. In most cases, because I had so little to eat, what my family served would be purely vegetable broth, watery and without meat. Common vegetables for this process were cabbages such as kale and collards, roots such as turnips, frequently detected a bitter taste, and things like onions, leeks, garlic, parsnips, smaller and woodier than currant parsnips, beans and dried peas, since they would keep well. If nettles, dandelion leaves, or fat hen were available at the right time, people would add them to their limited foods. While it will fill you and have lots of calories, it would be painfully repetitive to eat. Every day, every week, I get the same old taste and consistency. A modern person who likes many different foods, sweet or spicy ones, would constantly feel a pull of sadness brought by memories of those things no longer enjoyed. This very first day would not be a one-off shock, but an unending sequence of tough and overwhelming challenges. People would lose each comfort they currently rely on, all those ideas they don't even notice, every piece of modern protection. You would find your skin uncomfortable, your breathing difficult, and your digestive system troubled by new food and water. People would only be concerned with severe issues like warmth, food, water, and safety, along with the constant challenges and dangers needed to get them. Indeed, the passage of time has placed you in a place where everything is unsettling and strange. That quiet appliance noise, the fresh, natural smell and soft support from your bed can truly soothe you and ease your mind as your fears gradually go away. On days 2, 3, and 4, hard work doesn't end, dealing with the demanding schedule of the Middle Ages. When the morning sun appeared for the second time, its light just as unforgiving and severe as the first, the feeling of peasants' hard work would begin to lower on your shoulders. In truth, most peasants led painful, hectic lives, working hard every day and night, with little rest except during religious festivals. If you tried medieval fieldwork just once, your sore muscles would swell to become a whole orchestra of agony. Your chest would be full of agony from muscles you didn't even know existed, since most people today don't rely on them. By now, with your hands full of angry red blisters that might have already popped and bled because of dealing with the wrongly made tools, each time you squeeze something, it would be excruciating. With all the bending and lifting at work, your spine would soon start to feel as stiff as a pillar made of fire. The account of events we read will also include the reeve, whose only interest is exacting the consequences for your lord's loss, without considering our modern conditions or pain. He relied on growing the lord's domain successfully and managing everything the manor had to do to maintain his salary. It quickly became clear. People who did not work were not welcomed and every hand was needed, mainly when the farms were busy. Let's stay closer to your daily life, focusing on the tough work repeated year after year, mainly starting whenever spring begins, when the soil thaws out and the farmer labors again. The plowing. We thought of the lumber plow and the difficult work for the floundering oxen. However, tread on cold, damp, sometimes stubbornly frozen ground with your bare or poorly protected feet and feel how hard it can be in the early, bitter mornings. Using this plow, called an ard, the farmer would have to make several passes through the land to sufficiently loosen the heavy soil. When the Kuruka, which was heavier and much more efficient, was used on prosperous estates, as many as 8 oxen had to be harnessed and kept in pairs, with the trip to the thin strips called open fields requiring skilled management. Since the peasant strips were rarely next to each other, but scattered through the fields, which could take far too much time and effort moving their farming equipment between them, it would be hard to deal with the large and awkward plow, and the oxen may recognize your lack of experience, growing even more difficult, upset by the path and refusing to keep going. A reeve or another seasoned plowman could order you roughly, and your fellow peasants may simply sigh and look down on you, showing clear signs of being disappointed. Plowing was followed by the step of harrowing. Visualize an old wooden frame hauled by a team, carrying large stones, or the apprentice boy over the fresh, clumped earth. The teeth on this harrow would be wooden or iron to help the harrow break down the large lumps of soil, level the land, and prepare the soil for the seeds to be sown. Soon you realized how endless and arduous the job was, with blazing heat from the sun melting all your strength, fine soil exploding in your face and covering both your body and throat. Following this, the seeds are sown. We mentioned that gathering the seeds and putting them on the land was done by hand from a sack a farmer wore over his or her shoulder. Flex your muscles as you carry the rough bag of seeds with its unnoticed heavy load. Your left arm would cramp from using the same sweeping semicircle motion, hoping to create that beautiful, smooth scatter that the well-trained elders could do by now with ease. All the seeds were important, being small and silent, but filled with hope for food and life in the future. If a person planted too many seeds in some parts and too few in others, it was seen as an unforgivable mistake against everybody. Birds like rooks, crows, and clouds of pigeons were always around stealing the newly sown seeds from under one's feet. Since they were opportunistic thieves, everybody needed to be on guard and keep shouting to scare them off if possible. When sprouts appeared and the crops started to grow, the work of weeding took over and lasted for hours. A variety of tough, undesirable weeds like thistles, docks, and couchgrass would fight for space in the garden among the grain or the meager vegetables. Nothing was done with chemicals and life was not easy. The weeds were all removed by hand or cut with a standard hoe. So you spent hours, days, weeks kneeling or stooping on the hard land, your hands tiring and dirty, your knees aching. Could be hot and bright in the summer or cold and damp in the spring. Having to do the same thing over and over would be very hard on your spirit. Taking care of the hay in early summer was something everyone participated in to ensure the lords and their cattle were fed in winter, and also to provide for your own animals, should you have any. The grass in the best meadows, those belonging to the lord, and some common meadows had to be cut at the time it offered the most nourishment. The long, sharp, and curved blade, worn on a wooden handle, was simply called a scythe. It was important to train, pay attention to rhythm, balance, and skills, not only to rely on power alone. A loose swing could leave you with damaged turf, a broken costly mower blade, or cause a hazardous accident for you and a coworker. Picture how it sounds. Everyone at once hissing and swooshing their scythes, creating a distinct buzz and the wonderful, heavy, and intoxicating scent of freshly cut grass on a summer day. After that, The tedding, using traditional wooden tools to spread out the grass enough so that it can dry slowly under the sun, with the turning helping to prevent it from spoiling or drying uneven. Lastly, after bending to gather hay into huge cocks or little piles in the field, you had to either load it onto carts if available or carry it as heavy bundles to the Lord's barns in the village with great difficulty. All of the tasks took a lot of work and were performed with great speed because a quick summer rainstorm might ruin the hay and make it difficult to survive through the winter. Late summer or early autumn, after the grain harvest, was when everyone felt the most excitement and hope, but also worked harder than ever. Every healthy person from school age to old age was expected to work in the village from morning until night. We already mentioned that picking up rice using a sickle was especially tough labor. Think about the heat from the sun on your neck and back, the dust and bristles annoying you, entering your eyes, your nose, and your throat, as well as the pain from the rough, sharp stubble beneath your feet. Your body and clothes would be covered with sweat and mud. Men and women reapers would divide into groups and travel back and forth in the field, harvesting the grain with fast motions and leaving behind golden rows of cut plants. Following stooking, the air circulation helped each sheaf dry for a few weeks before they were put in carts and carried to the threshing floor. Light was treasured, so it was never wasted during the day. People would go on working in the twilight, stop for the night, then begin again before dawn with fresh spirit and ale. In the winter or whenever bad weather made farm work impractical, people would thresh the grain indoors. It was fortunate if they had a big barn and a well-packed floor for threshing, since they could use it as shelter from bad weather. In most cases, a patch of flat, dry and windy ground outside could be used as an ice rink. To make the flail, made of a long wooden handle and smaller but heavier wooden tip, useful and safe, you needed to have a certain skill and work with it in a gentle rhythm. You'd move the handle back and forth to bring down the swipple onto the spread-out sheaves. Many flails pounded against the earth at the same time. Thump crack, thump crack, thump crack as they were moved back and forth in a certain order to get all the grain ready for harvest. The wind would pull chaff, straw and dust through the air, making you unable to breathe freely and leaving you and your clothes dusty and your hair covered. It was a tough job and made me very tired, but it had to be done if I wanted any food. Finally, the process is completed by winnowing. A suitable lack of wind would make the grain easier to separate by having the mixture tossed up into the air by wooden tools or a thin winnowing basket. A steady, moderate wind would blow away the lower parts of the crop, but the wheat remained where it was on the cloth placed beneath. If the wind was missing or did not help enough, women or older kids would need to flap a large sheet or a fan for extra ventilation. This took even more effort. Apart from the main features of the seasons, there were countless routine duties in the peasant family that were hardly noticed, but kept it from falling apart every day. People did not have the luxury of a faucet for getting water. Collecting drinking water from the well or stream meant traveling a distance and toting heavy wooden buckets around the neck on a yoke or simply holding them in the hand, many times a day. If the well was beneath a deep layer of earth, filling a container with water by hand took much effort. The route would have been traveled in any weather, including hot days, bitter cold, wet rain, and heavy snow. Having fuel was always a days-long struggle that never left my mind. The Lord watched over who used the wood from his forest, as we've already seen. Usually, peasants could use fallen branches, dead wood, or cut small bushes and weeds. So, I used to search the woods for hours, remove small trees one at a time with my axe or billhook, and then carry the unsteady faggots back to the hut through tough terrains. When peat was present in some regions, people needed to use special spades to cut it from the bog, and after letting it dry for months, they carried it away as a heavy and unwieldy source of fuel. In places where there was little wood, one common source of fuel was dried animal waste, which was not very pleasant. Each day, or often twice, women were required to work all day turning grain into flour using a rotary handquern. Moving the runner stone by turning its handle with a wooden insert on its side, you could crush the grain that sat in the hole of the top stone. On average, to make enough rough and rugged flour for one day's bread, a person would have to push and pull for up to 3 whole hours. In the village, hearing the dull, repetitive noise of the women grinding their stones was very common and necessary. To bake the bread that way, over a fire on an open grate, took strength, experience, and a lot of courage. A bowl of dough could be put from the trough onto a heated flat stone and next covered by a pot held together with hot embers and ashes. A barbecue deserves frequent attention, a good sense of touch and a skilled touch, since the outside can burn if you aren't careful, and the inside may remain raw. Many girls and women made thread by spinning wool and flax whenever they could, as soon as they became old enough to learn this task. First, people used a drop spindle, then later, for those who could afford it, a simple spinning wheel to twist the carded or combed fibers into one thread. It took vast amounts of thread to create a small amount of cloth. Women in villages or families usually made woven cloth by themselves or by hiring specialist weavers, as it required much time. Clothes served their purpose, and since they were laboriously created and only repaired, they were eventually worn out. Replacing our clothes just because they no longer follow a trend or are a little used would not occur to anyone for its foolishness. A fire was not simply achieved, as makers had to pay close attention and exert themselves. Nothing caught on fire immediately. The process involved striking flint and steel together to create a spark which had to catch fire on ready-to-burn tinder, dry moss, certain fungi such as touchwood or charred linen kept in a tinderbox. And then this small flame was carefully and patiently nurtured by blowing and adding tiny, completely dry twigs, because this was the daily and sometimes hourly ritual. Since starting a new fire was work, everyone kept the fire alive and preserved the blaze by banked the embers throughout the night. Can you picture the effect of always having to do this heavy, relentless work on your 21st century mind and body? The exhaustion from all the moving would never leave and felt like a wet, heavy coat you could never shed. Most experiencing the same boring jobs would not have much chance to think deeply and explore their imagination. Since leisure and work might not be so clearly separated, there would be no idea of switching off after the day was done. Most of the time, life was a continuous hard-working cycle, occasionally interrupted by times of rest or a religious festival. Even before your body could take any more, when and how many days did your spirit start to weaken and fail under the harsh rule of old times? Here, time constantly grinds down your strength and belief, little by little but surely. Let your easy life, the amazing opportunities you have, and all the machines that help you be a reason for you to feel intensely grateful. During these days, the patient faces illness and tries various odd health remedies, a close fight with sickness and the strange medicines of the time. Assume, for the sake of this exercise, that it was through great determination alone, or because the villagers had realized you are not quite up to farming responsibilities and gave you hired duties such as mending nets, calling away birds, and watching over the geese, which are no less stressful. You were able to stay alive through all the early and demanding jobs. While everything on and in your body feels bruised, torn, and scorched, you are still inhaling the dust and smoke in the medieval air. Now, when your immune system has become weakened by stress, lack of proper food, and exhaustion, the microbes that filled the lives of residents in the Middle Ages would be most likely to attack you. Dysentery and many types of lung illnesses were bound to keep followers of our campaign in bed. With that, we should examine some more of the miseries of the medieval period. In early Scottish writing, ague could have described many diseases involving fever, especially in areas with lots of mosquitoes, which would be malaria. There would be sudden, scorching waves of ague, making you feel weak and distracted. To start, the chills would be so intense your teeth and limbs shook rapidly, as if they were being torn apart. Next, terrifying, overwhelming heat swept through your body, sending you into confused delirium and heavy sweating. At the end came utter tiredness and exhaustion before the dangerous process started again, either in days or weeks. It would take many generations before quinine, an effective drug for malaria, was reached in Europe. And the tree it came from, known as cinchona, was in South America before anyone there knew of it. Desperate methods were sought to treat ague. Patients prayed to saints like Saint Roch and Saint Sebastian, kept special amulets, or tried willow bark. Salicin, a precursor to aspirin, contained in the wood, might have lessened a bit of the discomfort. among other herbal concoctions. Apart from the common insect bites, scabies, and rashes caused by poor hygiene and tough clothing, people in those times could also get skin infections that were truly terrible and seriously affected their lives. Leprosy was widely feared as a curse from God, but many other skin diseases that make people look disfigured might have been mistaken for leprosy and brought horrible outcomes. True leprosy caused people to have strange skin growths, experience numbness in the limbs, have their noses collapse as well as the toes and fingers walking away, and eventually became blind. While lepers were made outcasts by law and communities, they were declared to be already dead by people, had to wear distinguishing gowns and warn others with a bell or horn, were made to life in leper houses outside the community, and depended on others' kindness for their survival. Having to endure both intense psychological and physical suffering, as minorities back then did, is difficult for us to picture. If you were worried about a contagion or forced to be very close to a person thought to have contracted a terrible disease, your fear would grow so much it could threaten your entire world. It seems that anyone working or staying outdoors could be seriously harmed by even the slightest wound, such as a thorn cut on the hand, a minor cut from a tool, or a superficial burn while cooking. A cut in the skin, where deadly bacteria like Staphylococcus and Streptococcus thrive, could easily become dangerous if people are not aware of antiseptic techniques. Symptoms of infection caused pus, sometimes referred to as laudable pus by medieval and Renaissance doctors, who believed its presence meant the body was eliminating harmful fluids during recovery. In this wound, the skin appeared red, became swollen, was hot to the touch, and very painful to touch. Shortly after, the infection might spread, which could lead to cellulitis, erysipelas, or sepsis, all of which were lethal. In the past, infections would often win because antibiotics were unavailable. Doctors would often prescribe methods that did more harm than good, such as putting on bread and milk poultices or cow dung. Although the dung may have included small amounts of antibiotic-producing molds, using it was not hygienic. Sometimes, a red-hot iron was pressed on large wounds to try to stop bleeding and treat infection. The pain caused by the procedure worsened the injury and often spread it further. Medical help from the village wise woman, known for her traditional recipes, wandering barber surgeon, involved in bloodletting, pulling teeth, and easy surgeries, as well as trimming hair, or from a university-trained doctor who belonged only to the wealthy and elite, often included common sense, Galen, Hippocrates, religious rituals, horoscope rules, and old superstitions. We should look more closely at the popular doctrine of signatures. Not all medicine was just lung work, distorted from its resemblance to damaged lungs, or walnuts matched to what they looked like inside a brain, which is what they were used for. Since eyebright had a spotting on its petals that seemed much like an eye, people would naturally use it for eye symptoms. Because of its spore-bearing point, adder's tongue fern was believed to heal snake bites or cuts made by sharp objects. People drew links through highly personal beliefs. They believed that God, knowing all, had left a clear mark on how his creations should be used for healing, and that anyone paying attention would recognize it. If you suffered from jaundice or liverishness, what might work was a dose of flower yellow sap, such as from celandine, or even plant that resembled a damaged liver. Even more than I realized, astrology was vital and typically the top influence in medieval medicine. In many cases, physicians and some lay healers used astrological charts and ephemerides to determine the best or worst times for doing anything from giving medical treatments to collecting herbs. It was believed that each sign of the zodiac was responsible for a specific part of the body, namely, Aries controlled the head, Taurus controlled the neck and throat, etc. It might be wise to arrange a headache treatment under a favorable aspect of Mars for Aries, and to avoid it if the moon was in a challenging position with Aries. As a result, doctors needed to complete another detailed and pointless, if not harmful from delays, step in patient's care. In addition to protecting from evil, many charms and amulets were made and worn for medical reasons. Wearing amulets with dry-toed legs, just a bit of deadly arsenic or a spider sealed inside nutshells or a silk pouch was once thought to protect from diseases such as plague, fever, or toothaches. To protect themselves, people in the Middle Ages would write their charms on small pieces of skin, fold or roll them tightly, and put them close to their bodies by wearing them or attaching them to their clothes, their neck, or an ailing part of the body. People thought that the magic came from the words themselves or from the process of writing and then wearing them. Because of the Greek idea of the four humors and their qualities, medicine, ideas about temperaments, diet, and lifestyle were all affected. It was commonly believed that illnesses happened when the humors were not in balance. The theory even examined foods as being hot, cold, moist, or dry. For someone with an excess of blood in their temperament, it is best to avoid hot and wet foods such as red wine, rich meats, and spicy dishes when sick. To help someone categorized as melancholic, with an imbalance of black bile, considered cold and dry, shown by gloomy thoughtfulness. Medical experts advise eating foods that are warm and moist, playing lively music, and enjoying the company of optimistic people. Such a suggestion would confuse and upset your healthy eating plan, leaving you even more likely to develop nutritional problems caused by the usual food of peasants. Bloodletting or phlebotomy was done to people frequently and was thought to aid proper blood levels. Imagine how desperately benumbed and unhappy you would become in that smoky, dim hut, lying on your straw bed, burning with fever, your whole body aching, all the while somebody tries to help, but only makes matters worse by leaching your blood, bad blood, they believed, and giving medicines containing repulsive things like mummified corpse dust. Or maybe you use woodlice and earthworms in place of a drug, while chanting Latin or astrological phrases, or using some magic words, moving along your hurt body. No gentle assurances supported by research or studies would be given. Instead, you would only have old traditions, puzzling ideas, strange theories, and an eerie, mystical feeling about the unpredictable processes in your body. Keep in mind that debilitating chronic illnesses are not always dramatic. Almost every person would experience frequent chronic joint pain, as what we know today as osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, due to working hard in all weather and living in damp, cold homes. Besides alcohol and opium-laced remedies, only crude, often dangerous medicines could ease the pain of ordinary people. With age, all people had to endure constant soreness, and their actions became more and more stiff and limited. As we discussed before, dental care was painful and simple, focused mostly on removal. Besides the harsh removal of diseased teeth by a village blacksmith or traveler, using old and frightening tools, was it possible to avoid such illness? People in ancient times often rubbed their teeth with cloth soaked in salt, chalk, or mixtures of herbs to help clean and freshen them. There was no discussion of brushing away bacteria, treating gum disease, or filling holes in the teeth. It was usual to see many people, even teenagers, with empty spaces in their mouths, cracked and rotten gums, and more than one decayed stump. Having foul breath, halitosis, all the time would be simply expected and inevitable whenever people interacted. For anyone who has gone through severe dental pain, constantly living with a terrible, unhelpable toothache would be a daily fear. Just having a child was often very frightening, as giving birth always ran the risk of danger for the mother and baby. Midwives were often experienced and passed on useful knowledge handed to them, but they did not know anything about sterility or germs. After childbirth, a painful disease called puerperal fever, childbed fever, caused by bacteria, usually Streptococcus, in the uterus could kill new mothers within days. If complications occurred during a mother's labor, including a breech birth, a transverse lie, or a blocked or long labor, birth attendants could only pray, hope, and attempt a few traditional methods that rarely helped. Many years ago, cesarean sections were not common during the lives of living mothers. Instead, they were occasionally carried out in haste on dead women to save the baby. Too many babies died each year from preventable causes. It was common for babies to succumb to diarrhea, common winter and summer diseases, many childhood ailments that lacked treatment, or just malnutrition in their baby food. Seeing so much new life end, or a young mother struggling to the end because of giving birth, would be a usual, ordinary occurrence that could harden people and cause them to accept events as God chooses, without much questioning. If you discovered in the final 10 days that illness was taking strong hold of you, your modern courage and faith in modern medicine would break apart. Now, your poisoned senses and tired body would have to face diseases, helped by terrible microbes, that you could not defend against and for which the cures were often risky and painful. Here, the river of life turns into a menacing and violent flood that could carry you to an undiscovered grave before anyone appreciates your youth. Let the quiet, logical faith you have in modern medicine, disease research, and the comfortable, scientific treatments you can receive today become a source of peace and provide a safe refuge. Periods 2 through 4. Unnoticed chains in society, the soft impressions of religion, how medieval minds and customs worked. If you've been assisted through these dangerous times by either good genes, dumb luck, or literally an invisible angel, you might have made it so far. You are alive, keeping your eyes open and still an obvious foreigner in the 13th or 14th century. By the time your daydream stretches on through another tough week, the clear, concrete elements of your life would be left behind, and our old, complicated and unavoidable rules, practices, roles, and fears would take over. Hierarchical land tenure and a mutual sense of loyalty or obligation shaped all aspects of daily life in a feudal society. As reeve or steward of the lord of the manor, even a minor knight could act as your almost complete ruler, affecting your life in many vital ways. As we previously stated, the manor court was run by the steward and oversaw the treatment of petty crimes, local quarrels, and the application of manorial regulations. Still, reflect on the scenarios that will need the court's attention. The peasant could officially report that another person's runaway pig entered his unfenced veggie patch and ate up all the winter cabbages. Someone else might argue that having the neighbor's faulty thatch roof constantly dripping into his home had ruined his stored grain and made the area where he slept uninhabitable. These were typically minor village matters, but they were significant, and the reeve or steward, acting for the lord, had to solve them by listening to other villagers who would swear, and mostly relying on local customs. If you did not appear in court or pay the expected fee, your belongings or livestock could be seized. Having common land was essential for peasant farming. Most manors had common areas where people grazed their animals, cut down important firewood, picked up reeds and rushes, and gathered peat for burning. Because surviving meant always having protected access to resources. Disputes over these rights, over how much to graze, cut down trees, or catch fish in the Lord's pond, were normal and almost always passionate. Consider how tense the atmosphere could be if you were seen using more firewood from the woods than you ought to, or if your make-believe small chicken kept going into other people's common pastures or gardens. The church's power could be seen in many areas well beyond attending worship services and hearing the Angelus bell. Since the parish priest was often not well educated or even literate in Latin, he also kept unofficial records, baptisms, marriages, and deaths, sometimes provided basic Latin and letter training, often just to those boys headed for the church, decided many moral issues, and handled the collection of tithes which farmers had to pay. The church's approach to sin, redemption, heaven, hell, and purgatory affected every man, woman, and child's point of view. Envy of your neighbor's good harvest, lustful desires, or pride in little you have done are included along with the major sins, like murder and theft. Typically, each year before Easter, a Christian displayed humility by confessing to a priest, resulting in the priest assigning penance and assuring that the soul was free from blame. You might be told to pray many Pater Nosters and Ave Marias, observe a period of bread and water fasting, or give alms to the poor, should you have any. A pilgrimage to the local shrine, often organized by the church, might be required. If your sins deserved more punishment, you could find yourself walking barefoot through the town to get to church, dressed in plain clothes and with a candle, and risk having to be scourged at the church entrance. Being forced to undergo such public punishments would shame a person into sticking with church rules and beliefs. We should examine the medieval imagination more closely, since it was full of all kinds of supernatural creatures, both good and bad, within a world filled with wonderful and terrible things. Unlike the tiny, ethereal, and playful fairies of Victorian stories, the fairies referred to by the Irish were considered good people to be respected. They were considered powerfully unpredictable and dangerous creatures from another world. People believed they lived in ancient earthworks, burial sites, forts, caves under hills, and remote, wild parts of the earth such as old forests and swampy marshes. They became angry when exposed to iron, upset by church bells employers rung, insulted by any sign of arrogance, and when called by their real names. They might steal milk, turn away travelers, contaminate a batch of ale, or scare people by replacing a baby with an ugly and whining changeling. People might place a bowl of cream, some bread, or even just a bit of milk outside, at night on either the hearth or doorstep to win them over. Venting critiques about the gods or touching their rituals could lead to their angry and severe punishment. Because you are so skeptical and scientific, you would need to be extremely careful around these emotional beliefs, lest your views upset others. In many cases, this world was home to goblins, hobgoblins, brownies, pucks, and boggarts, who were tied to specific families, farms, or the scenery itself. Some brownies, in Scottish and English folklore, helped around the house, but you had to treat them nicely and recognize that they might vanish if you offered them cash or new clothes. Others were just plain annoying, leading to missing objects, troubles at night, a tangled mane on the horse, sour milk, and sometimes causing accidents. All instances of things going wrong on a farm, such as strange events or sick animals, could be viewed as caused by entities that could not be seen. Even if most witch hunts occurred during the early modern period, 1500s to 1600s, fear of witchcraft had existed in medieval times for a long time. A village-wise woman or cunning man could find themselves accused of being a witch if someone's medicine did not work, if animals died after the medicine was given, or if a neighbor faced an unexpected problem soon after an argument with her. Many thought that witches, in concert with the devil or by natural connivance, could curdle milk just by looking at it, cause storms that destroyed crops, bring infertility or impotence, render people or animals sick or dead, and use sticks from poppets or make poppets burn to make someone or something fall ill. An allegation of being a witch meant sure extinction, possible separation from society, or a terrifying experience with water or with hot tools, as the last Middle Age trials were almost always followed by hanging or burning people. Because of your unfamiliar manners, different views, strange talk, and different way of speaking, you could easily end up under suspicion when people reveal their true feelings, if you weren't always very careful to be the same as others. Everywhere in life, people would look for omens, see them and understand what they represented, because a coincidence was almost always interpreted by them as a sign. If a dog keeps bellowing at night near someone who is ill, it might indicate that a death is soon to occur in the community. Unexpectedly spotting a raven or crow, and if it made a croaking sound over a house, could be very unfortunate. How a fire behaved in your stove, what you saw on stale bread in the pattern of mold, who the first New Year's guest was, and how animals acted could each mean something very important. People believed that their dreams were given by God, the devil, angels, saints, or the spirits of the dead. They regularly paid attention to these omens, signs, and dreams, and often sought advice from the priest or a wise local person. In the medieval era, death and the dead played a larger, more detailed, and often more frightening role in people's lives. At that time, graveyards were crowded with people and next to the church, so bones from ages past could frequently mix and be stored elsewhere. In ancient Peru, people lived every day beside the remains of their ancestors and those who had died in their community. People firmly believed in saints and valued their relics for helping from above, and at the same time, were greatly afraid of ghosts, revenants, or spirits who either died in dishonor, by their own hand, or with grief left unacknowledged. These spirits could visit again, looking for vengeance, requesting justice, or to frighten and cause problems for others. People firmly believed that offering masses and prayers for those in purgatory was important and essential for the living. Both Halloween and All Souls' Day were thought to be the closest moments in the year when living and dead people came close. So rituals were held to acknowledge, please, and pray for those who had died. Think about the various social customs and the unwritten rules we use every day. To make warm greetings, men might begin by bowing, removing their head covering, or kneeling to suit their position. Giving or receiving even a bit of food to eat had specific requirements of etiquette. Travelers were sometimes cared for by Christian monasteries, but there was a lot of precaution since people often had suspicious thoughts. A person who comes to a village could be a proper pilgrim, a music performer, a trader with goods, a devious cutthroat, a spy for the opposing lord, a vagrant, or, worst of all, just someone who has been caught up in a plague or other disease. Because you could not pick up on fine social cues, understand what is usual for your neighbors, understand the family or friend structure, and communicate in the local way, people would notice and seldom accept you. At most, they would just be interested, and at worst, they might want to hurt you. The land itself would seem to embody these beliefs and have its own presence, even though these forces could not be seen. Some people believe that a lonely old oak beside a crossroads might be a meeting spot for spirits, or it could be the location where pagan events took place, or perhaps where a suicide was interred, since crossroads were viewed as unblessed spaces. Even now, a ruined Roman villa can seem like the home that old, forgotten gods, dragons, or giants might have once walked through. Many hills, streams, dark glades, and old, mysterious places could hide their own secrets and spirits, so a person visiting them might accidentally offend powers that remain invisible to normal senses. Such a mass of hidden controls, with all their rules, status, religion, and belief in the supernatural, would feel immense and almost impossible to grasp for someone living today. It would direct the way people behave, talk, and think. To thrive there, you would have to abandon all your ideas about the modern, evidence-based world, become submissive and strongly conform. A surrender this deep could very well be the hardest thing to face in terms of protecting your 21st century character. Here, the constant flow of time highlights the challenges present in both the outside world and in our inner world. For a little while, rest in the safe thoughts of your mind, the strong faith in your beliefs, faith inspired by centuries of people fighting for your freedom. By the end of a month or two, a tiring day-to-day existence, the weariness and fading memories of one's own person. If we look back, it has already been 2 complete cycles of the moon since your puzzling arrival in this world of hardship. It is hard to believe how you survived, but you have, thanks to your toughness, some luck and losing some of your modern feelings. You have not starved to death, been sick unto death, or suffered an accident. Still, what kind of determination would result from this? Given all the suffering, pain, and loneliness you have endured, how would your inner life and feelings develop? At this point, the damage to your body and spirit would be so great that you would hardly recognize the changes that occurred. Continuously burning calories and energy would become normal since your body was scrapped for protein and nutrients. Losing the fat stored beneath your skin would have made your bones stand out more and your skin would be tighter. If you practiced this way, your muscles would be very fit, strong, and efficient, but they would also feel tired much of the time, experience sudden and painful cramps, and take a long time to recover after only mild stress. Pain could be sent to your knee joints, hips, shoulders, and spine, especially with no proper footwear to support your weight and with all the heavy lifting done on various types of ground. We have already discussed that your skin, with its sun and wind-dried, dirty, and harshly aged appearance, is proof of how hard your life has been. Constant irritations to your skin, infections, and even lice or flea bites that made you itch all day could make you feel practically no relief. After so much coarse, dark bread and watery, plain pottage, one's palate would be so tired that only vivid and differing tastes could seem appealing. A faraway glimpse of the Lord's table at a feast day meant you might envy the food, e.g., venison, swan, and peacock, the rich selection of pies, the fine white bread, pain de main, the wine, and the sweet Eastern cookies, even so much so that it hurt. Finding berries, nuts, roots, and fungi out in the wild might help, but would take a lot of time and sometimes pose the risk of eating a poisonous wild plant. If you were lucky enough, you could subdue a few berries full of bitterness and difficulty, pull out some edible roots from the ground using a sharpened stick. If you pushed your luck even more, fishing or catching a fish from the Lord's stream or pond was possible, but this violated another's rights and was therefore a serious offense. Each bite of what you eat would leave you thinking direly about how you struggle every day to eat properly. Not having comfort constantly would have filled your life with a wearisome, ever-present tone. In the long, dark, chilly winters up north, the smoky air in the little hut would become so cold and unpleasant that huddling by the peat fire wouldn't solve it. You would adapt to sleeping, even with the uncomfortable, lumpy bed and all the bugs biting you, the loud hut mates making odd noises and rustling, but only because you were too worn out to sleep properly. The scorching, long, hot days soon became hotter at night when the air in the hut seemed even harder to breathe, as mosquitoes and other free-flying pests were attracted by your body heat and waste collected outside grew much stinkier. Without air conditioning, the pleasant sensation of having clean, comfortable skin would probably just be a distant dream. However, the persistent damage to the mind and spirit could make these long weeks the hardest to tolerate. Doing the same things day after day, having limited conversations and noticing only dull and unchanging scenery would dull your mental abilities. The change to the country would leave your mind with very little to engage it, as most ideas and creativity would be missing here. Chatting with your fellow villagers would mainly include discussions about the unclear weather, the well-being of the livestock, recent local news and orders or rules from the priest or a lord's bailiff. Only folk beliefs about the sun blocking the light would count as science, while homemade crafts were the extent of artistic exposure, since no one ever discussed speculative subjects, unfamiliar experiences, or about faraway happenings. Should you discuss such matters in front of them, they would not listen, suspect the truth hidden within, or become afraid and claim your mind was going. Thinking about your life before this, the one you had in the 21st century, would make you treasure it even more and feel its loss much more painfully. You may end up wasting many hours while working on a dull project that involves repetitive actions, like weeding a field or turning a spindle, and your mind will dwell on your past, bringing back many memories and making you try to remember the feeling of your favorite foods, pizza, chocolate, fresh fruits, songs, symphonies, or rock, or the ones you love. However, if no additional, similar experiences occur and no one else shares these memories, they might gradually get dimmer and start distorting like photographs kept in bright light for a long time. Losing touch with your old self and having that connection fade would be very upsetting and worrisome. Since privacy was not an option in those huts and villages, you could never hide or keep to yourself when you wished for both privacy and solitude. All joys, few as they might be, feelings of grief, little illnesses, every success or shortcoming would, in some way, be noticed by the group and talked about. In theory, living side by side could encourage everyone to stick together and help one another when disasters like famines and attacks occur. But for someone used to being alone, it could seem very overcrowded, unnecessary, and stifling. Feeling utterly powerless would be extremely heavy and painful for your soul. You would see people suffer from terrible illnesses, extreme poverty, injustice, and untimely accidents every day, even though your education shows that their fates could easily be changed and fixed, but there would be nothing you could do about it. It is not possible to create life-saving medicines such as antibiotics quickly unless help is offered. The harsh and traditional system of laws cannot be changed in a hurry. People can be taught to farm using modern methods only if they are given proper supplies and believe that you have their best interests in mind. Having information about how to help someone without the ability to act could be a special, painful, and intense kind of loneliness for anyone experiencing it. Self-awareness and your entire sense of who you are can start to disappear bit by bit. If we took away your identity defined by today's life, your job, your schooling, your things, friends, inventions, and ways to express your thoughts and emotions, who would you be? As small and poor as you were, was your personality, so carefully crafted, little by little disappearing inside the heartless, unyielding nothingness of this world? Trying hard to remember who you really were inside would be a silent, tiring battle you'd have to fight every hour and every day. No matter what, despair would be a cold and persistent menace, always affecting you, even if you did not notice it right away. What did anyone have to hope for at that time? Improved results next year could be possible. Winter 1917 was only slightly harsher and deadlier than usual, an opportunity to rest from the illness. Such small hopes would have to confront the huge ongoing struggles and constant insecurity of day-to-day life. Medieval Europeans often found great comfort in religion, as it promised them better, eternally peaceful lives as compensation for the harshness they dealt with in their own world. For you, however, This might seem like either the most inadequate or most offensive way to deal with the harsh life people experienced during the Middle Ages. It's during these long and monotonous days when we begin to care deeply about the number of days we spend here. The issue becomes deeper and more challenging for a person's beliefs and emotions. Can your modern, clever, and sensitive mind manage to live, enjoy, or survive at all in a world with only very few comforts, challenges, or significant meanings? Time, the river here, is an enormous, featureless, chilling gray ocean, while your little, fragile spirit keeps leaking as you sail in it. Allow yourself to rest, knowing that your bright life, dear relationships, many sources of comfort and treasured freedom will lead you smoothly and happily to sleep. Remember, war is just in our minds. The experience of peace is true. As days go by and the light fades, I wonder where it is all leading. As time passes and shadows deepen, I hear whispers of the unusual and my own sense of self begins to fade. As the endless medieval calendar goes, pushing you much further than 2 months and maybe even into the 3rd or 4th, your fantasy about living begins to change again. Even though those hard times of shock to the senses, long hours of labor and onset of sickness have ended, they have only changed into a hard state of living by enduring it all, struggling nearly every day. The extraordinary world you lived in for so long has now changed, and medieval culture now holds you prisoner everywhere and everywhere you go. There would come a point when the physical decline was obvious, constant, and everyone just measured everything against it. Not having enough food to sustain you would have left permanent changes and marks on your body. Thick and healthy hair that you had in the past may now look scraggly, thinner, and more soap-like. Despite the rough, wrinkled, and dirty tone your skin has developed, sores can show up, and even if they manage to heal, it can be a very slow process and could still become infected. Not having enough vitamin C from fresh produce for several months may cause your teeth to feel loose and your gums to bleed as you chewed your coarse bread. The deterioration of your healthy teeth that was called scurvy, because of the effects of the hot and the ineffective light from your candles or rushlights, plus lack of good food. Your vision might begin to seriously falter and the world appear more unclear to you. Even the lightest daily duties such as gathering water or wood and feeling the full effects of strong sunlight would drain me until my stamina was near exhausted. The sun would not feel like hope for a prosperous day, but merely another reminder to resume rough and exhausting work. Now, let us explore some of those unusual events and beliefs which would make every day more strange and surprising for you, highlighting the uniqueness of this world back then. We touched on the subject of animal trials. Can anyone really comprehend such a bizarre image? A snuffling sow, its eyes gleaming, being charged by a church official or a state steward in a solemn, somewhat difficult to grasp Latin or similar speech, and several timid farmers offering to swear that the animal may have killed a baby. The importance of mens rea, the guilty mind in our justice system, would be completely overlooked if common law did not exist. Eating the fruit brought about their punishment, and as part of God's creation, the animal was made to pay for what it did. The formalities of the trial, the unique ritual, and worst of all, the sentence that punished an animal with the death penalty, would surely leave a powerful and enduring impact on anyone in a society where animals, humans, and everything uncanny were mixed. The medieval period viewed the natural world as necessary daily, yet its secrets were full of mystery. As some learned monks and professors carefully maintained, copied and sometimes slightly changed classical texts by Aristotle and Pliny, most peasants simply learned from experience, stories, Christian ideas, and bits and pieces of ancient pagan customs. It was common for educated people in the 17th century to believe in the existence of the barnacle goose. Since the place of migration for these geese was unknown in Western Europe and no nests were found there, people strongly believed they hatched out of barnacles growing on wood or trees by the sea. Historians like Gerald of Wales, Giraldus Cambrensis, in the late 12th century confirmed that they often saw these birds changing and coming out of their shells just as chicks do from their eggs. Unlike allegorical tales, people mainly viewed this as a practical explanation for how something in nature could happen. If you spoke too plainly about ornithology, migration, or the most basic aspects of biology, society would not appreciate it and might even see you as impious. While the forest supplied medieval families with usable trees, wood and food, the hunting inside it was generally only allowed for the lord and his servants. It was customary for artists to place the green man, a spooky mask or head formed by leaves, in the souls of churches. This wild symbol represented the fresh new life growing out of old nature. Naturally, outlaws and other lawbreakers wandered these places, unchecked by the law. Though the noble Robin Hood came from fiction, the real/true fear of common criminals, displaced men and landless knights joining forces in woodland outlaws was significant. Because they were considered without personal value, roving wolves' heads caused great fear among everyone from lone travelers to small communities. You could learn that travelers have told dark stories of how they destroyed homes and stole from merchants, or that sometimes all that remains are the charred, scorched remains of a house and its contents. Just the idea of keeping time not only through the sun at sunrise, midday and sunset, and with bells from church such as matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers and compline, even if these were more important for monks than for villagers, seemed odd to someone living in the modern world. Even though advanced water clocks, clepsydras, were built, they were both cumbersome and pricey. Therefore, most people only knew them from monasteries or the homes of the very rich, and because they didn't always keep time accurately, they really needed regular care. While hourglasses using exactly measured sand appeared near the end of the period, peasants still did not use these often. For most individuals, time was usually measured by the length of various tasks. A few minutes to recite the Pater Noster, or as long as light lasts to carry on certain jobs. Having multiple tasks would mean your day moves faster than your mind perceives it, leading to frustration. Since time was not measured like it is today, people may not have experienced it as a failing to waste it. We can look into some of the stranger medical stories from the Middle Ages to grasp their unconventional approach to healthcare. At that time, a woman's daily aches, mood swings, anxiety, periods of panic, or any inexplicable sickness could be linked to hysteria. Many people believed that, according to old medical theories, the uterus in women moved, so if it became too light or dry due to a lack of children or sexual relations, it could get detached and cause many health problems. Physicians tried to influence the womb by putting pleasant-smelling incense into the vagina, or sometimes they coaxed it down by using unpleasant fumes, burning hair, asafoetida, near the nose. The idea of how this solution was implemented and treated women is shocking to many people now. Using relics of saints to aid in healing was established in the actions of the church and common among ordinary believers. A piece of wood said to come from the true cross, the bone of a revered saint, a piece of the martyr's clothing or dust taken from a saint's tomb was believed to cure and protect by the grace of God. People would go on long and tough journeys to pay their respects at shrines that housed important relics. Trading genuine and fake relics was extensive and contributed considerably to the economy of the medieval period. Yet, despite its modest appearance, your local church could house an ordinary bone, a cloth or some water from a distant, famous shrine, believed by the neighborhood to cure fevers, stop bleeding and ease childbirth. As villages seldom possessed real medicine, people sought relief from such relics with their earnest faith and hope, using the items to treat what ailed them most. Knowing that the things everyone around you believed were wrong or unhealthy for you, yet still being unable to talk about it, would have major psychological effects. Just think of the concern in a village when people were talking about an expensive well that might have a gentle water sprite keeping it pure, or could be filled by a dangerous Jenny Green Teeth or Peg Powler, ready to catch children or animals for herself. Could mean listening to a serious discussion about why a cow's milk had dried out all of a sudden, or why it had soured after the cow was trampled by grass shot through by magical elves. If you did not speak up in such discussions and could not be fully present, others would understand and remember. Presenting a logical or scientific explanation that even you could share with them could be taken as you showing pride, committing blasphemy, illustrating witchcraft, or proving that you lacked reason. There would always be pressure to act, think, and believe as everyone else did. Even the smallest habits you had, such as your dress, manner of eating, laboring methods, choice of speech and worship, would constantly be observed. Though villages of the Middle Ages were close-knit among family and neighbors, they were generally narrow-minded, distrustful of others and frowned upon acts that varied too much from their customary traditions. Despite how long you were in the country and how much you tried, your foreignness would never disappear completely. You'd constantly be seen as a mystery, an outsider, one whose past was unknown, whose actions were questioned and whose character may never improve. Being an outsider all the time, working hard to suppress who you truly were and how you felt, would eventually take a huge toll on your mind. Your current range of education, choice of profession, personal hobbies, how you relate to others, what you believe politically, how you value right/wrong, and even your entertainment, all would be thrown out in this minimalist, tough and basic society. You may speak in simple words, since the conversations are about straightforward topics. Over time, your emotional reactions may become less extreme as you learn to protect yourself from all the hardships, heartaches, and close connections that escape you. While today, individuality is highly respected and important in Western society, in the Middle Ages it was not a central consideration. Many individuals found out who they were mostly or wholly from their place in the community and feudal system, their family, place in the manor, feudal lord, and their station within the church. Under these circumstances, the desperate effort you would make to keep your own identity and consciousness separate from the group's identity and rules could turn into a prolonged, dramatic, and finally distressing defeat. When you slowly lose yourself and your beliefs, that's when the real and deepest fear in your story might manifest. Even without drama or violence, you slowly fade away and become part of the crowd, your soul dying, much like medieval automatons moving and working just to go on. Rather than simply counting your remaining days, this number now shows the time you may have before your individual consciousness can no longer fight, is molded and disappears beneath the massive ideas and beliefs of the 10th, 12th, or 14th century. In examining history so deeply, we have discovered that living depends on ideas and constraints so unfamiliar that they change our very sense of humanity. Since you are about to snooze, wrapped in your own time, your own environment, and your own bed, let the extreme strangeness of times long past help you appreciate what you have in the here and now. The amazing, lively, though disorganized world in which you live is a blessing that most people would marvel at. When we consider the way things were in the medieval era, the idea of finding and sharing truth by our self-expression and behavior would likely have sounded like a dream. Be thankful for life's events. From here on, let all the turbulent marks of the past be erased entirely. Allow the gentle peace from your own safe, enlightened mind be the last thing that helps you slip into a peacefully pleasant, deep and restful sleep. It has taken an extraordinary length of time and could be quite demanding. Apart from this, what comes their way deserves their very best. Good night.